Fala pessoal, Ingrid aqui. Bora hoje continuar com os nossos vídeos em inglês de Orgulho e Preconceito. Fazia um tempinho que eu não fazia esses vídeos em inglês falando do capítulo desse livro aqui, mas hoje voltamos e aqui estou eu para narrar o capítulo 6, chapter 6 deste livro aqui. Bora ver o que está acontecendo com a família Bennet, quais são os altos e baixos, corações partidos. Tudo lindo. Então se inscreve no canal se você ainda não é inscrito e vamos ver o que está acontecendo com Lizzie e Jane. In this chapter, Jane was waiting for Miss Bingley's letter. She wrote for Jane, to Jane, and she was waiting to see if Mr. Bingley was returning to Netfield Hall. But when she got the letter, she discovered that they weren't coming back to Netfield Hall. Actually, they were going there. Who? Mr. Bingley and his friends, Mr. Darcy and sisters, they were staying in London at Mr. Darcy's house. And Jane was a bit disappointed with that, so she thought Bingley didn't like her the same way she did. And of course, Lizzie was angry with Bingley because he made her sister cry and be sad and so on. Mrs. Bennet was like, she just didn't want to believe that he wasn't coming back, so she said to everybody in the city he was coming back, but that wasn't going to happen. So Mr. Bennet, a lot of names I still didn't get used. Mr. Bennet said to Lizzie, he said Jane was, she was already disappointed with love, and now it was Lizzie's turn, and he how can I say that? He was like, pushing Mr. Wickham to Lizzie, saying that Mr. Wickham was a good guy, and everybody knew his story about Mr. Darcy, so Mr. Bennet was, pushing Mr. Wickham to Lizzie. It was Christmas time, and Mrs. Bennet's brother arrived with his whole family at their house, and she told them what happened, that Jane was in love with Bingley and she almost got married to him. She also said that Lizzie received a proposal, but she denied it, and instead of Mr. Collins marrying Lizzie, he married Charlotte Lucas. So she explained everything. After Mrs. Bennet said these things, her sister-in-law went to talk to Lizzie privately because she wanted to know more about what happened. So Lizzie told her aunt what happened. She explained that Bingley, everybody could see that Bingley was in love with Jane, that it wasn't just, like a feeling because of the moment, but he really loved her. However, her aunt, Mrs. Bennet's sister-in-law, she said that most part of the time these kind young men only fall in love with pretty girls while they are together, but when they go to different cities, when they are separate, the men soon forget the lady. But again, Lizzie said she was sure that he was in love with her. So her aunt, Mrs. Bennet's sister-in-law, she and her family, they live in London. So her aunt invited Jane to stay with them in London for a while after Christmas. But Jane should know, she couldn't have hopes and feed the idea about meeting Bingley in London. But while Mrs. Bennet's brother and his family were with them in their house in Lockburn, Mrs. Bennet's sister-in-law, the girl's aunt, she met Mr. Wickham, and she advised Lizzie to not fall in love with Mr. Wickham because he didn't have any money. And Mr. Bennet, her father, Lizzie's father, expected the girls to have a good marriage, a sensible marriage, because then, the father wants his daughters to have good marriage and these things. So she advised Lizzie to not fall in love and not marry Mr. Wickham because of that, because he didn't have money. And Lizzie said to her aunt at that moment she wasn't in love with Mr. Wickham, and she didn't blame him because he didn't have money, but she blamed Mr. Darcy because, you remember the false story Mr. Wickham told everybody about Mr. Darcy. Crazy things just happens now. The Christmas ended, and Jane and her aunt and uncle went to London. While she was there, Jane wrote to Caroline Bingley, but she didn't return. She didn't send a letter back. So Jane decided to go where Miss Bingley lived, and she visited her. They chatted a little. Miss Bingley said that she didn't know Jane was in London. They chatted. She said Miss Bingley, a lot of names, oh my gosh. Miss Bingley said she didn't know Jane was in London, and she also said her brother was always with Mr. Darcy. So in that moment, Jane didn't have the opportunity to meet and talk to Bingley. After this visit, Jane wrote to Elizabeth saying what happened. Some weeks later, again, Jane wrote a letter to Lizzie. In this letter, she said that Lizzie was right all the time, that Miss Bingley didn't want to be her friend. She was like, no, yeah, I'm going to be good and polite with you, but I don't want to, have relationship with you. So after this letter, this moment, Jane was sure that Miss Bingley didn't want to have any connections with Jane, with her. So she was, decided to forget Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley and this family. Lizzie received this letter, read, and everything. After that, she discovered that Mr. Wickham wasn't interested on her anymore. Now he was interested in another miss who was going to inherit a huge amount of money, and she was disappointed with him. She wrote a letter to her aunt saying what happened, but she said she wasn't angry with Mr. Wickham or this other lady, but she was okay. But her young sisters, Kitty and Lydia, were more upset than her. This is what happened in our 6th chapter. Eu acho que eu nunca vou conseguir me acostumar com tantos nomes que tem nessa história. Eu sempre me engasgo, mas tudo bem, vocês me perdoam. Se você conseguiu entender o que aconteceu com a família Bennet nesse capítulo, deixa aí a tua curtida no vídeo. Como eu não quero que você pare de praticar o teu inglês, o teu listening só neste vídeo, aproveita para fazer o curso gratuito que tem disponibilizado para vocês. O acesso para ele está lá na descrição do vídeo. Você aproveita também e dá uma olhada e pega os materiais gratuitos que eu tenho para vocês também. O acesso para eles está lá na descrição do vídeo. Agora pega esse vídeo, compartilha com pelo menos um amigo teu, and I see you next time!